Hello and welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, hi, you're very welcome. This is Reading the Past and I'm Dr. Cat. And today we're talking about stealing the crown jewels. And I realise now that the way I've worded that might be slightly concerning, so please don't call anybody. I'm not suggesting we hatch a plot. But it is a common plot, particularly in fiction, isn't it? Whether it's novels, film or TV. Frequently, if there's a heist movie happening, then perhaps the target might be the crown jewels of the United Kingdom. It's happened so often, there are so many examples of this narrative that there's too many for me to name here. What I want to think about is the fact behind that fiction. When I talk about the crown jewels, I am talking today of the items that you will find in the Jewel House of the Tower of London. These are the ceremonial objects that belong to the office of the monarch. They differ from the private collection held by the Queen and members of her family. These are objects that are used for state occasions, most famously the coronation itself. These are the objects that make a monarch. They are our tradition. So contained within them will be crowns, the orb, sceptre and rod. The ampulla used to contain the holy oil for anointing a new monarch. The coronation spoon. Swords that are used within the ceremony. The ceremonial bracelets and spurs that are placed on the monarch's body. And, of course, the coronation robes. These are also the items that are used at the state opening of Parliament, and they may also be brought out for other state occasions, because included within these crown jewels are plate of gold and silver, maces, other ceremonial garments, and various other things, including musical instruments. The crown jewels of today, in the 21st century, refers to an enormous number of objects, but I think it's important to highlight that this was not the case with the crown jewels or royal regalia of the 1200s, 1300s, or even 1600s. What we have had is centuries of time to build up and maintain a collection of regalia. And this was not the case previously. There was an attrition of objects because of loss, theft, pawning, and various other reasons, which we will be looking at today. So when I do talk about the crown jewels of 12, 13 or 1600, please don't be imagining the rooms and rooms and rooms of objects that you might have seen in the Jewel House at the Tower of London. This guy, poor old King John, known to many in history as Bad King John, gets blamed for a lot. And one thing he is certainly blamed for is being responsible for the loss of the crown jewels. So the story goes, in 1216, King John was trying and failing to stabilise his kingdom. John decided to cross the Wash. This is an estuary in the east of England. Unfortunately, it seems he had misjudged the tide, as he did so many other things, apparently, during his reign. His baggage train, which is believed to have contained the crown jewels, was lost to the water. As if to add insult to injury, King John died later that year. The cause is believed to have been dysentery. The crown jewels have not always been housed in the Tower of London. In fact, they were moved there on the orders of King Edward I. Prior to that, they were protected by the abbot and monks of Westminster Abbey. And in many ways, as a storage location, Westminster Abbey makes way more sense than the Tower of London, particularly if we think about, even today, where those jewels see most of their use. In coronation, it happens at Westminster Abbey. The Palace of Westminster, where Parliament sits, is another key place for them to be used for the state opening of Parliament. But the issue is that in keeping the crown jewels at Westminster Abbey, you have to be able to rely on and trust the abbot and monks. And as Edward I found out in 1303, they could not always be relied upon. I think it's worth mentioning that Edward I and his monks had had a bit of a falling out. The Pope had said that monks and the clergy were not responsible to pay taxes to their local nation. Edward I was not very keen on this idea. He couldn't quite reach the Pope, but he could certainly reach members of the church in England, and they would face the brunt of his anger. Edward I was a king known for his, frankly, apocalyptic rages. It is said that his entire bloodline was descended from a demon, and there's a great story that goes along with that. And if you would like me to tell that story, then please do let me know in the comments section down below. One day in 1303, Edward I finds out that his royal store of jewels at Westminster Abbey has been ransacked, and he is furious. It is believed that the royal collection of jewels at this time was kept in the security of Westminster Abbey, either in the Pyx chamber, a room full of boxes, or in the chapter house crypt. Regardless of the exact location, for me it's pretty obvious that if somebody's going to break in and steal all of the crown jewels, however small that collection may have been, it would have required the monks and probably the abbot to have been complicit. Otherwise, surely an alarm would have been raised. Edward I seems to have thought that's what's going on, because he arrests the entire body of monks and abbot and puts them in the Tower of London. Whether because of insufficient evidence or the protection of the ecclesiastical body, he couldn't touch the monks. He couldn't vent his spleen against them. Fortunately for King Edward I, it wouldn't be long before items from the royal collection started turning up in London's pawn shops, and indeed apparently in less salubrious locations such as brothels. In addition to being able to reclaim these items and restore this royal collection that had been stolen, Edward I also got a name: Richard Pudlicott, a merchant. When Pudlicott was tracked down, he was found to be in possession of some of these stolen goods. Unfortunately for him, he did not come under the protection of the ecclesiastical courts. He was a layman, and so Edward was free to vent his wrath against him. So the story goes, poor Dick Pudlicott was flayed alive for his transgressions, and then his skin was stretched across the door in Westminster Abbey, from behind which he had been able to steal the king's jewels. This is the oldest door in England. The door itself is believed to have been constructed in around the 1050s, and it can be found in Westminster Abbey, which was consecrated in 1065. Perhaps most startlingly and tellingly, this door leads to the chapter house, which is one of the locations that was named as being the king's storehouse for jewels. Also, somewhat disturbingly, traces of skin have been found on this door. Might these be the final remains of the thief Richard Pudlicott? Well, no. The skin has been analysed, and it was actually found to be cowhide, presumably put there as a canvas upon which painting could be placed. But I think it's quite telling that the people who care for Westminster Abbey, and particularly for this door within the Abbey, went looking for this skin, because it certainly isn't very visible on this photograph. It seems to only exist in quite small quantities. And when they found it, they were prepared to spend the money to try and find out what kind of skin it was. Is it possible that for this curatorial team, at least some of them thought it might have been human remains? Perhaps it is unsurprising, but after this, Edward I felt that he could no longer trust the Abbey's security, and so he made the decision to move his regalia to his own palace and fortress of the Tower of London, where it would not only be under his own paid guard, but also it would be in one of the most fortified places in the entire land. Edward had strengthened his tower's defences, putting an extra curtain wall round the outside, making it a concentric castle with 2 rings of defence. This had happened in around about 1300. It seems that Edward I had found the perfect location to keep his crown jewels. So perfect, in fact, that the crown jewels have continued to be stored at the Tower of London in safety ever since. Well, sort of. Between 1338 and 1342, King Edward III decided to pawn his great crown to pay for his wars in France. Around 3 centuries later, in the early 1640s, Henrietta Maria, wife of Charles I, allegedly attempted to pawn or sell the crown jewels on the continent. She was doing this just before the start of the Civil War. Ultimately, her plan failed. Parliament found out what she was up to and blocked her from doing so. A few years later, in 1649, the royal jewels and regalia were broken down, melted and or sold off on the orders of Oliver Cromwell. In this same year, Charles I was tried and convicted of treason and was beheaded outside the banqueting house. There was no more need for any crown jewels because, as far as our nation was concerned, there would be no more kings. Despite the evident propaganda value of melting down all of the insignia of royalty, it did not mean that our nation would remain a republic for very long. And indeed, in 1661, brand new regalia would have to be created, because the interregnum was at an end, and Charles II, Charles I's son, was about to be crowned king. Today, the crown jewels are kept under armed guard in the Jewel House, which is a purpose-built and secured display area in the Waterloo block. However, they have been stored in various other locations in the Tower of London as well. In the 19th century, for example, paying visitors were able to enjoy a view of these jewels in the upper room of the Wakefield Tower. In the 17th century, Charles II's newly minted royal regalia were being kept in the Martin Tower. This was the home of Talbot Edwards, the deputy keeper of the crown jewels. His boss was the keeper of the jewels, Gilbert Talbot. And it's possible that Gilbert Talbot failed to pay Talbot Edwards sufficiently. Either way, it seems that to make a bit of extra money, Talbot Edwards would allow people into his home to view the regalia. Some go further and allege that he would permit the crown to be tried on by these visitors for an extra fee. In 1671, Talbot Edwards' plan to earn a bit of extra money had the knock-on benefit of seemingly winning him some more friends. He became particularly enamoured with a couple who'd attended the Tower of London. Dr. Alif, a most reverend parson, had appeared with his lovely lady wife. While looking at the jewels, Mrs. Alif was taken ill. Concerned for her well-being, Talbot Edwards permitted her to rest and recuperate in his bedroom. Parson Alif was gratitude personified, and he returned with gifts. Over the coming weeks and months, a friendship grew between Edwards and Alif. So much so that Alif was dismayed to see that Edward's daughter, Elizabeth, was as yet unmarried. That would never do, and as luck would have it, don't you know, Parson Alif happened to have an unmarried nephew of a similar age. Perhaps these two might make a likely couple, a happy marriage. A date was set so that Parson Alif, his nephew, and perhaps a couple of friends might return to the tower, maybe have a look at the crown jewels, and then we could see if the nephew and Elizabeth might get along. All was well and good, except that Parson Alif was a fabrication, yet another disguise of the notorious rogue Thomas Blood. Some referred to him as Captain Blood, some as Colonel Blood. It's unclear to me whether he ever earned either title, or in fact if his name was Thomas Blood. There is a lot of disagreement about that too. What we do think we know about him is that he was a thief and a disguiser. He fought on both sides of the Civil War. He had lands in Ireland which were then confiscated from him. He attempted to kidnap and kill the Duke of Ormond, and he also claimed that he had been involved in plots to assassinate Charles II. The wife that he had brought was in fact an actress, probably from Drury Lane, that Blood had hired for the purpose. Talbot Edwards evidently had a high degree of trust and faith in the man he thought was Parson Alif, so much so that he either gifted or sold the man a pair of pistols. In effect, Talbot Edwards had armed the man who was planning to rob him. On the day of the meeting, Thomas Blood, still posing as Parson Alif, arrived at the tower with somebody claiming to be his nephew, and they also brought with them a couple of friends. The group convinced Talbot Edwards to show off the crown jewels. Once they were alone in the room together, it wouldn't take much to incapacitate this ageing ex-soldier. He was hit over the head and stabbed in the belly, and the gang set to work hiding the crown jewels about their person. Thomas Blood had brought a mallet, and he started to hammer the crown flat to make it easier to hide under a cloak. The royal orb went down somebody's trousers, and then they were also setting about sawing the sceptre in half to make it easier to conceal. But the best laid plans can quickly fall apart when something unexpected happens, and it was about to. Because, as luck would have it, this was the day that Talbot Edwards' son, with Edwards, decided to surprise his family with a visit home. The robbers were interrupted midway through, apparently soaring through the sceptre. They had to make an escape, and they had to do it now. It wouldn't take long before With Edwards would find out what had happened and raise the alarm, and raise the alarm he did. The gang almost made their way out of the tower. They almost escaped with the loot, but they were all stopped, captured, and the jewels, smashed and cut as they were reclaimed. Anybody with even the most passing interest in history probably has a good idea of what they might expect would happen to Thomas Blood. After all, we have seen how monarchs tend to react when they feel slighted or wronged. I think it's well within the realms of possibility that Thomas Blood should have expected a fairly grisly end to have met him because of his crimes against the literal crown. And that makes what happens next all the more surprising, because Thomas Blood demands a private audience with King Charles II, and King Charles II accepts. To this day, no one fully knows what was exactly said in this meeting, what passed between these two men, and they certainly weren't sharing. We do know that Blood is said to have confessed to his role in the theft. Also, even more astoundingly, he is supposed to have told King Charles II of his plans to assassinate him. For reasons that continue to baffle, Charles II pardons Thomas Blood. Not only that, he returns lands in Ireland to him. These lands were worth £500 a year. Charles II also ensures that Thomas Blood will be welcomed at court. Perhaps even more astounding is that it seems that Thomas Blood was employed by the king and perhaps others to act as a spy. After Blood's death in 1680, many at court assumed this was just one more trick or deception being played by an arch disguiser, this time someone who was attempting to avoid paying his debts. A demand was made to have his body exhumed so they could check that it was actually him in the coffin. However, as they say, even a stopped clock can be right twice a day, and this may have been the only occasion where what seemed to be going on with Blood was actually the case. As far as we know, according to the official reports, the failed attempt of Thomas Blood represents the last time that anybody even came remotely close to stealing the crown jewels. Today, they are among the most securely kept property in the entire world. But that doesn't mean that theft doesn't haunt them. Of all of the many breathtaking gems that are currently on display in the jewel house of the Tower of London, the Koh-i-Noor diamond is arguably the most spectacular. It is one of the largest cut diamonds in the world, and currently it is set in the front of Queen Elizabeth the Queen Mother's crown. According to the Tower of London's website, the diamond was discovered in 15th century India. It was passed from ill-fated male hand to hand until it earned a reputation of bringing bad luck to men. It was presented to Queen Victoria in 1849. So far, so good. This is a lovely, shiny gift from India to the woman who would eventually become their empress in 1876. However, this narrative, to me, somewhat obscures what actually happened, because the gift of this diamond was made to British troops by the 10-year-old Maharaja of the Punjab, Duleep Singh, and he made this, in quotes, gift following the imprisonment of his mother. It is perhaps even more telling that at the same time that he was apparently gifting this diamond, he was also signing away all claims to sovereignty over his nation. In 1851, the diamond was displayed at the Great Exhibition, but it seems that the public response was underwhelming, and this led to the diamond being recut. The process made the stone shine more brilliantly, but it did also decrease its overall size. But what do you think? As always, I'm looking forward to seeing your discussion in the comments section underneath this video. Or you can come and find me over on my social media. I'll leave links to my Instagram and Twitter in the description box. You can follow me there and we can continue this conversation. I do hope you've enjoyed this video and found it useful. If you did, then please let me know by hitting the thumbs up. Please also subscribe to this channel, and while you're there, hit the notification bell next to the subscribe button so that YouTube tells you when I've next uploaded. I hope you're going to have a great day, whatever you're doing, and I look forward to speaking to you all in my next video. Take care of yourselves. Bye bye for now.